Amstetten, Austria, a sleepy town with flower boxes on windowsills, quiet streets, and polite neighbors who mind their own business. In this town, a father reported his daughter missing. Her name was Elisabeth Fritzl. She was 18 years old, and her father, Joseph Fritzl, claimed she had run away to join a cult. He handed police a handwritten letter, supposedly from her. It said she didn't want to be found, that she was safe, that no one should look for her. The police believed it. So did the media. And for the next 2 decades, the world forgot her name. But Elisabeth was never in a cult. She had never left the town. She was just beneath it. Joseph Fritzl was not a man who looked like a monster. He was an engineer, smart, calculated, soft-spoken. He paid his bills, took vacations, had children, and he was building something. For years, in the basement of his home, he worked quietly. He told neighbors it was a workshop, a wine cellar, a storm shelter. But behind 8 locked doors and a soundproofed steel wall, he built a prison. When Elisabeth turned 18, he asked her to help him carry a door. She followed him into the basement. He drugged her, chained her, and shut the door. The world above kept turning, but her world stopped. The dungeon was small, cramped, hidden behind a disguised shelf. There was a toilet, a small sink, no sunlight, no escape. The walls were concrete, the air was damp, and the silence was unbearable. Joseph came every day, sometimes with food, sometimes with threats, sometimes with things no daughter should ever fear from her father. Months passed, then years. Elisabeth counted time in hair strands, in body aches, in the flicker of fluorescent light. There was no window, no clock, no calendar, only the sound of his footsteps and her will to survive. In 1988, Elisabeth gave birth, alone, in the cold, on a dirty mattress. There were no doctors, no help, only the echo of her own screams. The baby, a girl, survived, and Joseph, he took a photo. A proud moment, he said. He brought diapers, formula, a blanket. Then he left. More children followed, 7 in total. 3 stayed with Elisabeth in the basement. 3 were taken upstairs, where Joseph and his wife claimed they had been left on the doorstep by Elisabeth, still pretending she was in a cult. His wife, Rosemarie, believed it. So did Child Services. The world bought the lie. Again, life went on in Amstetten. Joseph mowed his lawn, hosted barbecues, he waved to neighbors, and all the while, beneath his feet, his daughter and her children were trapped in darkness. The children born underground had never seen the sun, never walked on grass, never heard traffic. They grew up in whispers, in flickering light, in a world without sky. But Joseph was careful. He controlled the air supply, the food, the lights, and every heartbeat inside the cell. Elisabeth taught her children to whisper, to read, to dream, but she knew hope was dangerous. Hope could break them. And yet, in 2008, something happened that would change everything. A child got sick, and the world above was finally forced to look down. It was a cold spring morning in April 2008. Inside the basement, 19-year-old Kirsten, Elisabeth's eldest daughter, collapsed. She was pale, struggling to breathe. Her eyes rolled back, and Elisabeth, terrified, knew her child would die if she didn't act. She begged Joseph, pleaded, screamed. For the first time in 24 years, he agreed. He took Kirsten, unconscious, up the stairs and into the world. At the hospital, doctors were confused. Kirsten was malnourished, severely ill, but what disturbed them most was how absolutely unrecorded her existence was. No birth certificate, no ID, no school records. She was a ghost. Doctors demanded answers. Joseph spun another lie. He said Kirsten was his daughter's child, abandoned by Elisabeth, who was still in the cult. He handed over another forged letter, but this time, it didn't work. Something was off. Authorities began a search. They appealed publicly for Elisabeth to come forward, not knowing she was already nearby, underground. Joseph felt the pressure. He returned to the basement, and for the first time in over 2 decades, he brought Elisabeth up the stairs. It was the beginning of the end. Elisabeth was taken to the hospital under tight security. She saw sunlight, felt fresh air, smelled the world. And then she saw Kirsten, barely alive. Doctors and police asked her who she was, and for a moment, she stayed silent. Then, in a whisper that cracked years of silence, she told the truth. I am Elisabeth Fritzl. The nightmare had a name, and the story she told would horrify the world. 24 years. Rape. Children born and raised in a cellar. A mother held captive by her own father. The news broke like wildfire. Josef Fritzl was arrested that same day. He denied everything. At first, tried to say it was consensual, that Elisabeth wanted to stay. But the evidence was overwhelming. DNA tests proved he was the father of all her children. The basement was found, the locked doors, the chain, the tiny rooms, the soundproofing. It was not a misunderstanding. It was hell. And Josef had built it himself. Neighbors were stunned. The wife, Rosemary, claimed she knew nothing. The town fell into a state of shock. The monster had lived among them, waved to them, hosted them for dinner, all while his daughter and her children rotted below their feet. When police entered the basement, even seasoned officers were shaken. The ceiling was low, the air sour, the rooms smaller than prison cells. A dirty bed, a child's drawing taped to the wall, a makeshift kitchen with a hot plate and broken fridge. Elisabeth had lived here since 1984. She had given birth to 7 children in this space. One of them, a baby boy, died after breathing complications. Josef disposed of the body in a furnace. No funeral, no name, no record, just ash and silence. The world finally saw what Elisabeth had lived through, and it was far worse than anyone could have imagined. 3 of Elisabeth's children had never seen the outside world. They were born underground, raised underground. They had never seen the sun, never touched grass, never spoken to another human being besides their mother and their abuser. Their skin was pale, their eyes light-sensitive, their speech stunted and strange. They had learned to whisper, to tiptoe, trained to survive in silence. Psychologists called them children of the dark. They weren't just traumatized, they were alien to the world above. The other 3 children, the ones Josef raised upstairs with his wife, had believed their mother abandoned them. They had never known she was just feet beneath their floors, screaming into silence. When Elisabeth spoke to police, it wasn't just to tell her story. It was to protect her children. She demanded they be kept together. She insisted on privacy. She agreed to testify, but only if they were safe. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a mother. She says the countries and die. She wasn't to serveth. It was make sure that their mother and faction in the mother. Elisabeth, it was only Chak. In the face of pure evil, Elisabeth had built something remarkable in that dungeon. A family. She taught her children to read. She gave them rules, structure, comfort. She kept hope alive, even when hope should have been impossible. When asked how she survived, Elisabeth simply said, "Because I had no choice."
In March 2009, Josef Fritzl stood trial. He was 73 years old, wearing a gray suit and hiding his face behind a binder. The charges: rape, incest, coercion, enslavement, false imprisonment, manslaughter for the baby who died. Elisabeth appeared in court, but not in person. She recorded a video testimony, 11 hours long, painstaking, relentless, undeniable. When it was played in court, Josef crumbled. He confessed, said he was sorry, tried to cry, but it was too late. The world had seen him for what he truly was, a monster wrapped in fatherhood. The trial lasted just 4 days. On March 19, 2009, Josef Fritzl was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life in a psychiatric facility, with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. The courtroom was silent, but in the eyes of every juror, Every police officer, every spectator, there was only one word: justice. Yet for Elisabeth and her children, there would be no true justice. No way to erase the past. No way to forget the pain. Only healing. Only time. After the trial, Elisabeth and her children disappeared from the public eye. They were given new names, new documents, new lives. They moved to a secure location in an undisclosed part of Austria. Guarded, private, protected. Doctors, therapists, teachers, all worked to help them adjust. The children saw the sky for the first time, watched cartoons, played with other kids, learned what it meant to be free. Elisabeth eventually found love. She began to rebuild, piece by painful piece. But the scars remained, in silence, in memory, in the shadows that still followed her name.
Freedom was a beginning, not an ending.
For Elisabeth and her children, adjusting to the world was overwhelming. Lights were too bright, crowds were too loud. Even simple things, elevators, doorbells, trees, felt foreign. But slowly, they began to learn. Therapists helped the children understand emotions they had no names for. Doctors treated skin that had never seen sunlight. And Elisabeth tried to become more than just a survivor. She became a woman again, a mother in full, a protector, not a prisoner.
The Fritzl house, the ordinary yellow home with white trim, became a global symbol of evil. It sat empty for months. Tourists took photos. Locals stared with disgust. Eventually, the basement was sealed with concrete, permanently closed. No one would ever walk those halls again. No one would ever hear another scream down there. What was once a dungeon became a tomb of silence. The house was sold, renovated, but it will always be remembered as the house of horror. Josef Fritzl, now in his 80s, lives in an Austrian psychiatric prison. He is frail, isolated, forgotten. Reports say he rarely speaks, that he's growing senile, that other inmates despise him. He once controlled a world, a private hell built with bricks, chains, and fear. Now, he controls nothing. There are no lights to turn off, no keys to hold, only walls and time. Elisabeth never sought fame. She never gave interviews. She chose peace over publicity. But her actions spoke volumes. She protected her children, faced her abuser, told her story once so she would never have to tell it again. She showed the world what survival truly looks like, not in screaming, but in quiet strength, not in vengeance, but in rebuilding. She refused to be defined by what was done to her. Instead, she redefined what it means to survive. For 24 years, the world never knew she was missing. She was buried beneath floorboards, beneath lies, beneath the illusion of a normal home. But she never gave up. Elisabeth Fritzl was more than just a victim. She was a mother, a teacher, a warrior in the dark. Her children were more than prisoners. They were born into a nightmare and walked into the light. And Josef Fritzl? He will be remembered not as a father, but as a blueprint for evil, hidden in plain sight. This was the story of the girl in the basement, and her name will never be forgotten. Sometimes the greatest stories of survival aren't found in war zones, but in the quiet shadows of ordinary homes. Elisabeth Fritzl lived in darkness for 8,516 days, but she never gave in, never gave up. She raised children in a prison, protected them, loved them, taught them how to hope when there was no sunlight and no freedom. The world failed her, The system failed her. Her own family failed her. But in the end, she rescued herself. And that is the truth that echoes louder than any horror she endured. Today, Elisabeth lives in peace. She is no longer the girl in the basement. She is a mother, a survivor, a symbol of resilience, and her story, no matter how hidden it once was, will never be buried again. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories told with care. Leave a comment below. We read everyone. Thank you for watching.